The morning I woke up in that hospital bed, the first thing I heard was my daughter-in-law laughing on the phone in the hallway. She was telling someone, the doctor said another week, maybe 2. After that, we can finally breathe. I did not have the strength to turn my head, but I understood every word. 8 months. That is how long I had been lying in St. Vincent's Medical Center in Hartford, Connecticut, while the world I built with my own 2 hands was being dismantled piece by people who shared my last name. My name is Eleanor Brennan. I am 67 years old. I worked 34 years as a high school English teacher in West Hartford, and after my husband Thomas passed from a heart attack in 2009, I raised our only son Patrick on a teacher's pension and the small life insurance policy Thomas had the foresight to take out. The house on Maplewood Drive was mine. I want you to understand that from the very beginning. Thomas and I bought it in 1987 for $142,000. And after he died, I refinanced it under my name alone and paid it off in 2018. 4 bedrooms, a finished basement, a wraparound porch. I painted myself every 3 summers. That house was not just a roof. It was the place where I taught Patrick to read at the kitchen table, where Thomas and I danced to Frank Sinatra on our anniversaries, where I sat alone every Christmas Eve after Thomas was gone, lighting a candle in the window because old habits die slow. The stroke came on a Tuesday in March. I remember I was making tomato soup from scratch because Patrick and his wife Caroline were supposed to come for dinner. I was stirring the pot, and then the spoon was on the floor, and then the floor was on my face. That is the last clear memory I have before the hospital. The neighbors found me through the screen door. Apparently I had managed to crawl close enough that Mrs. Petrowski heard me knocking. I want to talk about Caroline for a moment because to understand what happened, you have to understand her. Patrick met her at a dental conference in Philadelphia 6 years ago. He is a periodontist, makes a good living, has his own practice off Farmington Avenue. Caroline was a pharmaceutical sales rep at the time, the kind of woman who walks into a room and immediately calculates the price of everything in it. She has a laugh that sounds like it was rehearsed in a mirror. From the first Sunday dinner I hosted for her, she asked me 3 questions. How much was the house worth, whether Thomas had left me any investments, and whether I had ever considered moving somewhere more suitable for a woman my age. I was 61 at the time. I served her my mother's pot roast and smiled because Patrick looked happy, and a mother learns to swallow things for her children. They married in 2021 at a winery in the Berkshires. I paid for half of it because Caroline's parents, who own a marina in Mystic, said they were tapped out from the renovation. I noticed that the renovation included a 40-foot Sea Ray docked behind their house, but again, I said nothing. I wore a navy dress that I bought on sale at Macy's, and Caroline's mother, Janice, wore designer something or other and asked me where I got my cute little outfit. I smiled. I have spent my whole life smiling at people who say cruel things in sweet voices. After the wedding, the visits got shorter. Then they came with conditions. Caroline did not like the smell of my house, even though I scrubbed every surface with vinegar before they came. Caroline did not like that I kept Thomas's recliner in the den. Caroline did not like that I refused to update the kitchen. One Sunday in February, about a month before my stroke, Patrick sat me down at my own kitchen table and said, "Mom, Caroline and I have been thinking. Have you considered selling the house? You could move into one of those nice senior communities in Avon. It would free up some equity for you. And honestly, this place is a lot for one person." I looked at my son. I saw the boy I taught to ride a bike on the driveway out front. I saw the teenager who once told me, when he was 16 and Thomas had just been diagnosed, "Mom, when I'm a doctor, I'm going to take care of you so good you'll never have to worry about anything." And I saw a man wearing a watch his wife had picked out, repeating words she had put in his mouth. I told him I was not selling. I told him this was my home and Thomas's home, and the only way I was leaving was in a pine box. He nodded and patted my hand and said, "Just think about it, Mom." Caroline was in the living room pretending to read a magazine, but I could feel her listening through the wall. 3 weeks later, the stroke. I do not remember the ambulance. I do not remember the first surgery or the second, or the induced coma they put me in to reduce the swelling on my brain. What I remember is fragments, a nurse with a Boston accent humming Patsy Cline, the smell of disinfectant and lilies. Patrick's voice once far away saying, "I love you, Mom," and then a long dark stretch where I was not anywhere at all. When I started to surface, I did not let on. This is important. I want you to remember this. The first time I could hear clearly, I kept my eyes closed and my breathing steady because the voices in the room were Caroline and her mother Janice, and what they were saying made my heart, even in its damaged state, beat like a drum. "The realtor is coming Thursday," Caroline said. "Patrick already signed the papers. Power of attorney. Thank God she made him executor on everything after Thomas died. We don't even need her signature for most of it." "And the furniture?" Janice asked. "Estate sale next weekend. Whatever doesn't sell, we'll donate." Patrick wants to keep his father's recliner, but I told him absolutely not. That thing is a fire hazard. What about her if she wakes up? The doctor said it's getting less likely every week. And even if she does, Janice, look at her. She's not going home. She's going to need a facility. We already toured one in Bristol. Medicaid will cover most of it once we spend down what's left. Smart girl. It's not like she would have lived much longer anyway. And honestly, Patrick has been saying for years that the house is wasted on her. He grew up there. He should get it. We should get it. We're the ones with the future. I kept my eyes closed. I kept my breathing steady. But inside, something old and tired and patient began to wake up. Something that had been buried under 34 years of being everyone's good teacher, everyone's kind mother, everyone's quiet widow. My grandmother, who came to this country from County Cork with nothing but a wool coat and a wedding ring, used to say there was a difference between a lady and a fool, and the difference was knowing when to stop being nice. I had reached that point. I did not wake up officially for another 6 days. I let them think I was still slipping. I listened. I learned. I found out that Patrick had used the durable power of attorney I signed in 2010 after Thomas died to transfer the deed of the house into a joint tenancy with himself in May, 2 months after my stroke. He claimed it was to protect the asset. I found out that Caroline had cleared out my closet and donated my clothes to Goodwill, keeping only my jewelry, which she had appraised. I found out that my late mother's china, the set she carried over from Ireland in 1952, had been sold on Facebook Marketplace for $300. When I finally opened my eyes and asked the nurse for water, Patrick was not there. He came that evening with Caroline trailing behind him, and the look on her face when she saw me sitting up talking, recognizing them, was the look of a woman watching her bank account shrink in real time. She recovered fast. I will give her that. She kissed my forehead and called me Mom for the first time in her life. "Eleanor, thank God," she said. "We have been praying every day." I smiled at her. "I have already told you I am very good at smiling." "Patrick," I said, my voice still rough from 8 months of tubes, "tell me everything." What did I miss? He sat on the edge of the bed and held my hand. He told me a beautiful story. He told me how worried they had been, how Caroline had been absolutely amazing handling everything, how the doctors had not been hopeful, how he had needed to make some hard decisions to keep the household running. He did not mention the deed. He did not mention the estate sale. He did not mention that the house I had paid off was now legally half his. I nodded. I told him I understood. I told him I just wanted to come home. He glanced at Caroline. She glanced back, and then he said the words I will remember on my deathbed. "Mom, about that, we need to talk. Caroline and I have been living at the house since the spring. We renovated it. New floors, new kitchen, new everything. It doesn't really make sense for you to come back there. The stairs alone with your condition. We found a beautiful place in Bristol. Sunny Glen. They have a memory care wing and everything. I do not have memory problems, Patrick. Not yet, Mom. But the doctors said, "Which doctors?" Caroline jumped in. "We have all the paperwork at home, Eleanor. We can go over it when you're stronger." The important thing is, you're awake and we love you. I asked one more question. I asked it slowly because I wanted to see their faces. And the house? Patrick looked at the floor. Caroline looked at Patrick. After a long pause, my son said, "Mom, the house is in both of our names now. We thought, with a stroke, that we should have everything in order, just in case. In case I died. In case anything happened." I smiled. I closed my eyes. I told them I needed to rest. They left. Caroline blew me a kiss from the doorway. The next morning, before they could visit again, I made 3 phone calls. The first was to my old friend Margaret Donovan, who taught social studies at the same high school for 22 years and whose husband Frank is, by the grace of God, an estate attorney in downtown Hartford. The second was to my bank, Liberty Federal Credit Union, where I have had an account since 1976 and where the branch manager, Rosalind, still remembers when I used to bring Patrick in for the lollipops. The third was to a man named Detective Carl Mendez at the Hartford Police Department, who I knew because his daughter had been one of my students 12 years ago. A quiet girl named Anita who wrote a beautiful essay on Toni Morrison that I still have in a file somewhere. Frank Donovan came to see me that Friday in a suit that smelled like good cologne and 20 years of legal work. He listened to my story without interrupting. He took notes. When I finished, he set down his pen and said, "Eleanor, I want to be very careful here. What your son did may or may not be legal, depending on how the power of attorney is written. But what your daughter-in-law did and what your son let happen is going to depend on a few documents." I told him where to find every document. The original POA from 2010 was in the safety deposit box at Liberty Federal, not at the house. The deed to the house was also in that box. My will, which Frank had drafted in 2012, was also there, and it specifically stated that the house was to be sold and the proceeds divided among Patrick, the West Hartford Public Library, and the scholarship fund I started in Thomas's name at the high school. Patrick did not know about the will. He had never asked. Frank also asked about something the average son might not think to check. He asked who was listed as beneficiary on my retirement accounts, my life insurance, and the small inheritance I had received from my mother in 2015. Patrick was beneficiary on the retirement accounts, but the inheritance from my mother had been placed in a separate trust, in my name only, with Frank as the successor trustee. That trust held approximately $310,000. Patrick did not know about that trust either. Frank smiled at me. The kind of smile lawyers smile when they realize the case is going to be a pleasure to work on. "Eleanor," he said, "we are going to make Caroline very sad. I spent 4 more weeks at St. Vincent's, then 6 weeks at a rehabilitation facility in Glastonbury. I want to tell you the truth about that time, because the comments on stories like mine always ask. Recovery from a stroke is not glamorous. I had to learn to swallow without choking. I had to learn to write my own name again, and the first time I managed it, it looked like a child's handwriting. I had a speech therapist named Diane, who made me read aloud from a copy of Charlotte's Web until I could say Wilbur without slurring. I cried in the bathroom more than once. I prayed every night. And every day between exercises, I worked with Frank and with Rosalind from the bank and with Detective Mendez to build a case that Patrick and Carolyn never saw coming. They visited me twice a week. They brought flowers. Caroline brought a card she had made on her computer that said, "Get well soon, Mom," with a picture of all 3 of us at the wedding. I kept it on my nightstand. I smiled when they came. I asked about the house renovations. I let Caroline show me pictures on her phone of the new white kitchen, the grey luxury vinyl plank floors that had replaced Thomas's hardwood, the open concept that had been created by knocking down the wall between the dining room and the living room, the wall Thomas had built with his own hands as our first project after we bought the place. "It looks beautiful," I said. "You have such good taste, Caroline." She glowed. She actually glowed. People who lie for a living forget that other people can lie too. Then, in the 5th week of rehab, I made a call I had been saving. I called Patrick. I told him I had been thinking about Sunny Glen, the memory care place in Bristol. I told him I had been wrong to resist. I told him I understood now that I needed help. and that I was grateful for everything he and Caroline had done. I asked him to set up a meeting with the admissions director. I asked him to bring the paperwork. I told him I wanted to sign whatever was needed to make my care official, including a new will if necessary, leaving everything to him and Caroline since they had been so good to me. Patrick wept on the phone. Actual tears. I could hear them. He said, "Mom, I love you so much. You don't know how much this means to us." Behind him, I heard Caroline say, "Oh my God, oh my God." The meeting was scheduled for the following Wednesday at 2 p.m. at Sunny Glen. Patrick said he would bring Caroline and the paperwork. I said I would bring my own attorney, just to have someone look things over. What Patrick did not know was that Frank Donovan had already filed an emergency petition with the Hartford Probate Court to revoke the durable power of attorney, citing abuse of fiduciary duty. He did not know that Detective Mendes had spent 3 weeks gathering evidence: the estate sale receipts, the Facebook marketplace listings, bank statements showing $87,000 transferred from my joint checking account into Patrick and Caroline's personal account in the month after my stroke. He did not know that Rosalind at Liberty Federal had quietly placed a hold on all activity on my accounts the day after I called her. He did not know that the deed transfer he had executed in May had been done with a notarization that, upon investigation, turned out to belong to a notary who was Caroline's college roommate, Jessica Maldonado, who was now under investigation for notarial fraud across 6 unrelated transactions. What Patrick also did not know was that on the morning of our meeting at Sunny Glen, before I left the rehab facility, 2 officers from the Hartford Police Department, accompanied by a representative from Adult Protective Services and a process server from Frank's office, were waiting in the parking lot of Sunny Glen for him and his wife to arrive. I arrived first. Frank drove me. I was using a walker, but my speech was clear and my mind was clearer than it had been in years. The admissions director, a kind woman named Beverly, came out to greet me and then quietly excused herself when Frank explained what was about to happen. Beverly, it turned out, had a mother who had also been the victim of a financial exploitation scheme, and she gave my hand a squeeze that I will never forget. Patrick and Caroline pulled up in a brand new Lexus SUV at 1:58 p.m. I had not seen the car before. Apparently, it had been purchased in June. Caroline got out first, carrying a folder of paperwork and wearing a smile that could have cut glass. Patrick was behind her, looking tired. The officer stepped forward before they reached the entrance. I was watching from the lobby window. I will never forget Caroline's face when the officer said, "Caroline Brennan, you are under arrest for financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, forgery, and conspiracy to commit elder fraud." She turned to look for Patrick. Patrick was already being read his rights by the second officer. He looked through the lobby window. He saw me. I did not smile. I did not wave. I just looked at him, and for the first time since he was 17 years old, my son cried in front of me and meant it. The legal process took 14 months. I will not bore you with all of it, but here is what mattered. The deed transfer was voided due to fraudulent notarization. The house returned fully to my name. The funds Patrick and Caroline had withdrawn were recovered through a combination of asset seizure and a civil judgment Frank obtained on my behalf, totaling $146,000. Caroline pleaded guilty to 2 felony counts and was sentenced to 4 years in the Connecticut Women's Prison in Niantic, with the possibility of parole after 28 months. Patrick, because he cooperated with the prosecution against his wife, received a suspended sentence with 5 years of probation, mandatory restitution, and the permanent revocation of his power of attorney privileges in the state of Connecticut. His dental practice survived, barely, after the state dental board placed him on professional probation. Caroline's parents, Janice and her husband Robert, did not visit her in prison. Janice called me 3 times in the first month after the arrests, leaving voicemails about how I had destroyed their family. I never returned the calls. The 4th time she called, I answered, and I told her in the calmest voice I have ever used, "Janice, your daughter destroyed my family. I just collected the bill." Then I hung up. She has not called since. I had to redo the house. The renovations Caroline had done were not just ugly to me, they were a kind of erasure. Thomas's hardwood was gone. The wall he built was gone. His recliner had been donated to a thrift store in Bristol, and although I drove there 3 times trying to find it, I never did. I cried about that more than anything else. A house is not just lumber and drywall, it is memory. They had taken 8 months of my life, and they had also taken the bones of the home I built. I had to rebuild on top of what they left behind. I hired a contractor named Ray, a Puerto Rican man in his 50s, with hands like baseball mitts and a habit of singing along to oldies radio. He helped me put down new hardwood floors. We could not bring back the original, but we got close. We rebuilt the wall between the dining room and the living room. I had a carpenter named Eduardo build me a new recliner in roughly the shape and color of Thomas's old one. And the first night I sat in it, I cried so hard that Ray came over the next day with a bottle of Bushmills, and we sat on the porch until the sun went down. Patrick wrote me letters during his probation. He was required to as part of his rehabilitation, but I think some of them were honest. The first dozen I threw away unread. By the 15th or so, I read them. They were ugly and full of self-pity. But underneath the self-pity was a small voice I recognized, the voice of a boy who once told me he would take care of me when he grew up. I did not respond to the letters for almost 2 years. The first time I wrote back, I sent him a single sheet of paper with 2 sentences on it. "You are not forgiven yet, but you are not forgotten." He cried over that, his therapist told me later. She had reached out with Patrick's permission to ask if I would consider family therapy. I said no. I said maybe in a year. That was 3 years ago. We are still working on it. Caroline served 31 months. She wrote me 1 letter from prison, which I burned in my kitchen sink without reading. I am not a saint. I have my limits. Today, I am 71 years old. I live in the same house on Maplewood Drive. My speech is clear, my mind is sharp, and I walk 2 miles every morning around the neighborhood with my friend Helen, a widow who moved in across the street last spring. I volunteer twice a week at the West Hartford Public Library, reading to children in the picture book corner. I have a small garden in the back where I grow tomatoes and basil, and every August I make sauce from scratch and freeze it in mason jars for the winter. Patrick and I have dinner together once a month. He comes alone. He drives down from his apartment in Bristol, the one he moved into after the divorce, and we eat at the kitchen table where I once taught him to read. We do not talk about Caroline. We do not talk about the house. We talk about his work, about the weather, about his nephew, my brother Kevin's grandson, who just started college. We are not what we were. We may never be. But we are something, and something is more than I had a right to expect after what happened. I want to say one more thing before I go. To any woman watching this who has a feeling in her gut about her son, her daughter, her in-laws, the people in her life who are supposed to love her, I want you to listen to me. That feeling in your gut is not paranoia. It is not bitterness. It is not the old woman in you getting suspicious. That feeling is the part of you that has been keeping you alive for 60, 70, 80 years, and she knows what she is doing. Do not silence her. Do not apologize for her. Get your papers in order. Know where your deed is. Know who your beneficiaries are. Have a lawyer you trust, and a banker who remembers your name. Keep a friend who is not family on speed dial. And when the time comes, and you will know when it comes, do not be the lady. Be the fool. Be the difficult mother. Be the woman who says no. The people who love you will understand. The people who do not will reveal themselves, which is exactly what you need them to do. I am Eleanor Brennan. I was in a hospital bed for 8 months. They thought I would not wake up. They thought wrong. I have had 3 years to sit with what happened, and I want to tell you what I have come to understand. None of this fell from the sky. Every door that opened for Patrick and Caroline to walk through, I had built myself one quiet compromise at a time. The power of attorney I signed in 2010 without reading carefully. The Sunday dinners I hosted while swallowing Caroline's small cruelties because I did not want to make Patrick choose. The half of the wedding I paid for when her parents pretended to be poor. Every time I smiled instead of speaking, I taught the people around me that my kindness had no flaw under it. A person without a flaw is a person other people will eventually stand on. I am not blaming myself for what they did. They made their choices and they will live with them. But I have learned that being good and being foolish are not the same thing, and for too many years I treated them as if they were. My grandmother from County Cork understood this in a way I had to nearly die to remember. She used to say that the world rewards the woman who knows her own worth and punishes the one who keeps marking it down. I had marked mine down for 40 years. What saved me was not luck. It was the slow, patient work I had done long before the stroke. The friendships I kept with people like Margaret and Frank Donovan, even when I was tired and just wanted to stay home. The account I kept at the same credit union for 47 years so that Rosalind knew my voice on the phone. The trust I set up in 2015 because something in my gut told me to, even when Patrick said it was unnecessary. The students I had taught with care, like Detective Mendez's daughter, who remembered me as a kind woman when their parents needed to know whose side to be on. None of that was accident. It was character, deposited over decades, paying interest exactly when I needed it. If there is one thing I want any woman my age to take from my story, it is this. Your goodness must have a backbone, or it will be used against you. Teach your children to love you, but also teach them to respect you, because love without respect curdles into entitlement. Keep your papers in a place they cannot reach. Keep your mind sharp by using it. Keep your circle wide enough that no single person can rewrite your life behind your back. And when something in your gut whispers that the people around you are not who they say they are, do not argue with that voice. She is older than you. She has been right before. She will be right again. I am not bitter today. I am awake. The difference between those two things is everything I have left.